as a start, just allow me please to stop sharing and so that I can show my face. All right. Yes, good afternoon. Can I have somebody say good afternoon back to me? At least just open quickly, say good afternoon. Let us know you are here, you are hearing us.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Doc. Thank you so much. Yes. Yes, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody, colleagues, especially our ECRs, our mentors. I think people are joining little by little, but yes, and our mentees. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. It's a Friday after a holiday. Here in South Africa, we were celebrating 29 years of democracy yesterday. So I think people are still a little bit tired from the festivities of yesterday. But yes, welcome to the South African Education Research Association, Early Career Researchers' first webinar for 2023, which is entitled Making Scientific Research Papers Accessible to the Public and Writing for Our Communities. This is a partnership between the SAERA and the Conversation Africa, who, by the way, they usually give this kind of a workshop or a webinar for a fee, but they were kind of generous to give it to us for free. I hope Dr. Bailey will maybe give a little bit more on that. They gave it for free for our ECRs who are, inside and outside of South Africa. The SAERA, specifically the SAERA ECRs. Remember, ECR is early career researchers, those people who have just completed their M and D, and those who are still busy with their postgraduate studies. My name is Mphoentle Modise. Some of you know me. I'm a lecturer at UNISA. I am also the ECR representative in the SAERA Executive Committee. And today I am your host. I'm excited. I'm excited to hear what Dr. Bailey and the conversation has to give to us today. Thank you again for joining us. I just want to make a quick announcement or request rather to please remember to mute your mics, please, and put off your videos and make use of the chats for comments and questions. You will have enough time for question and answer session later after the conversations. We have a conversation with the Conversations Africa. So yes, welcome. I'm not alone. I am with Prof Zayd Waghid, who is our facilitator. Prof Waghid is an associate professor from the Faculty of Education at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. He's also an executive member of SAERA. He's also the associate editor of the South African Journal of Higher Education. So you are in good hands. He is an NRY2 rated researcher focusing on critical pedagogical approaches that use educational technology to create socially just relations in the classroom and in society. Our facilitator, Prof Waghid, has co-authored 4 books. I will put a list of the books for you guys to see in the chat later. He's written 11 book chapters and 17 peer-review articles. Prof, I just want to mention that you are my hero. I'm looking up to you. He has received the Council of Higher Education Heltasa National Teaching Excellence Award in 2019. And he has also recently received the prestigious Fulbright Visiting Scholarship for the 2023-2024 academic year. He's got a long, beautiful profile here. I'll put some of it on the chat for you guys to see. But Prof Zayd, over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Firstly, thank you for that. Those kind words. Thank you for that. I look forward to the presentation today by Dr. Bailey. So Dr. Bailey will be our speaker today. and I will provide to you her bio. So she's a strategic initiatives editor at Conversation Africa, where she trains academics how to write for the media and works on science communication projects that creates awareness of the product among researchers and academics. Prior to this, she was the Title's Health and Medicine editor in an 18-year career as a journalist and communicator. She has worked at several major daily and weekly newspapers in South Africa, including the Star newspaper. She's currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of the Witwatersrand, where she looks into issues of citizenship and democracy. She has a master's degree in politics and development studies and is specialized in access for information and democracy for her doctorate. So we look forward to Dr. Bailey's presentation. And I should also just mention this quickly. So I'm not currently at home. So if you hear some noise, it's because I'm at the gym, because we have load shedding in my area. But then I found out that the area that I moved to also has load shedding. Unfortunately, this is the situation that we have. But nonetheless, I'm handing over to Dr. Bailey, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Prof Zayd, and thank you so much for having me, colleagues. It's so lovely to have you to be here this afternoon. What Prof Zayd didn't tell you is that I'm also an alma mater of CPUT. It's one of my first alma maters. So I studied journalism in Cape Town. I'm from Cape Town, and I currently live in Johannesburg, where I ply my trade. Thanks so much for that introduction, Prof Zayd, and thanks so much, Mphoentle, for all the effort that you went through to schedule today's session. I'm really excited to be talking to early career scholars about the conversation and why it is that we're such a cool platform. Like Prof Zayd said, I am one of you guys. I'm also an early career scholar. I don't have as prolific a CV as Prof Zayd, or as many of you. I haven't really published yet, but we'll chat all about that a little bit later. So let's get going into our presentation. It's meant to be very chilled. I have scheduled some question times in our session today, but if you do have a pressing question, maybe you can just drop it into the chat box and we can pick it up when we do have a question time, or when Prof Zayd monitors or opens up for questions later. So the way today's talk is going to run, I kind of divided it into two sections. The first is just to tell you a little bit about the Conversation Africa, who we are, how we work, what we do, what it is that makes us really cool. And then in the second part, I really want to talk about how we can help you make your research public. And what we'll do in that part is we'll talk about science communication, we'll talk about what the conversation does and how we do it, and how we can help you get your published research in the public domain so that people can understand it, learn from it, and be informed by it, which is what the conversation is all about. Yes, so let's start off with what is the Conversation Africa. Maybe let's just start by a show of hands. Use your little reaction emojis on your Zoom. Who knows what the conversation is? Does anybody know the conversation? Prof Zayd and Mphoentle obviously don't count because they've written for the conversation. But anybody else know what the conversation's about? I just want to have a look to see if anybody knows about the conversation. You can also chat in the type in the chat box. Sorry, that was if you do know about the conversation, it will just be nice to know. Nobody knows about the conversation? Okay, we'll move on from there. So what is the conversation? On your screens, you're seeing a front page of the conversation on the left-hand side, and you're seeing an article on the right-hand side. So the Conversation Africa is a news and analysis website. We are kind of like the Mail and Guardian in South Africa, the News 24, the City Press. If you're from outside of South Africa, we kind of like the Daily Nation or the Guardian in Nigeria. We are a news website. It's run by a team of journalists that sit across the continent, and I'll tell you a little bit more about us. But we are exactly like another media platform. We provide news to the world and news and analysis to the world. But there are two things that make us a little bit different to everywhere else in the world. And the first thing is that all the articles that are on our site are actually penned by academics and researchers like yourselves. So we've got about 17 journalists that work for the conversation, and we've got a support staff of about 5 to 6 people. But those journalists don't actually write the articles that you see on the site. What they do is they edit the articles so that the academics can actually have the byline. So as you see on the left-hand side of the screen, all the articles are penned by academics. You'll see Bendete from UCL. I can't really see, it's too small. I think the other articles by the jazz history articles written by Gwen Ansell. So everybody is an academic who writes for the conversation. You have to be an academic and you have to have a certain qualification criteria to be able to write for the conversation. We'll get into the criteria a little bit later, so don't worry about that. But about the site, our site is divided into 7 sections. It ranges from arts and culture to business and economy, education, environment and energy, health and medicine, politics and science and tech. At the start of COVID 2020, we then also started publishing, we set aside a COVID page where we could collate all the articles that we had published around COVID. And that's what makes our site unique, is that we have all these sections and they're all written by academics. The second thing that makes our site really, really unique is that we don't publish anything without you as the academic or the researcher being completely comfortable and completely happy with the end product. Now, if any of you have ever had any engagement with media entities, maybe News 24, maybe the Star newspaper, the Argus in Cape Town, you'd know that once you submit an article to those newspapers or those websites, you don't really have much control over how things go. They will probably change it, they might cut it, they might tweak it, they may take 3 months to publish it. They will decide how things go. But with us, we make sure that that entire process sits with you. Now, that's because what we've done at the conversation is we've realized that you are the knowledge bearers. You are the stars of the show. And all we are there to do is to shine the spotlight on you and your work and help people understand what you've done. We acknowledge your time that you've spent completing your PhDs, completing your postdocs, working on the research that you have. And we want people to know that you are the experts here. We want people to know that you've done the work, you've got the expertise, and they can then refer back to you as the expert and not us as the journalist. So that's what our site's about, and that's our motto. You'll see on the top of the screen, our actual motto is academic rigor, journalistic flair. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but we are there to pair up with you as the academic expert, as the showstopper here, and to make sure that your work goes out into the public domain. I thought I'd just take 2 minutes to tell you about the conversation and how it started. So the conversation is actually an enterprise that started in Australia 11 years ago by a man called Andrew Jaspin. And he had an engagement with an academic, in fact, he was an editor at the time, and he had an engagement with an academic who had really had a bad experience with a journalist and said, you know what, I am never talking to journalists ever again. They're the scum of the earth. I don't want anything to do with them. And they then, based on this man's experiences, they then came up with this model where you as the academic could write about your work, and we as the editor could just come in, edit that work, and then send it back to you to make sure that you're happy with it before we published it. That model has now found wings across the world, and we now have conversations across the world. We have a conversation in Australia and New Zealand. We've got one in the US, one in the UK. We've got one in France, Spain, Indonesia. Oh, I'm even forgetting Canada. And we're working on getting Brazil and India on board as well. The Conversation Africa, however, started in 2015 by a colleague of mine, our founding editor. Her name is Caroline Southey. And we started off in Johannesburg, where I'm based. We got some free accommodation at Wits University, and that's where we got going. But within 1 year, we'd expanded to Kenya. So we now have an office in Kitisuri, in Nairobi, in Kenya. We also have an office in Lagos. We've got an office in Dakar, and we've got an office in Accra. So we've now expanded across the continent, and we're trying to provide a continental offering. So we really are trying to expand the African academic's voice to make sure that you as an African academic can get your work into the public domain. People can know you, they can hear you, they can understand your work, and they can learn from it. one of the things that we like about the conversation is that we try to democratize knowledge. And I think that everybody who has engaged with us, and maybe when Prof Zayd provides his testimonial a bit later, you will hear exactly how he is able to disseminate knowledge and actually share and democratize knowledge with ordinary people. So that's our site. That's how we came about. Currently a team of 21, 17 editors and about 5 or 6 support staff across the continent. Now, we work on what you call a Creative Commons model. What our Creative Commons model does or means is that anything that is published on our site can be republished by anybody across the world. So whether you're running a university's comms website, whether you're running your own website, your own personal blog, whether you're running your daughter or son's creche website, you can reuse the material on the conversation. And I say the creche website very particularly because there is even content on our site for 4 to 5-year-olds. But I'll talk about that a bit later. But so you can publish our content wherever you would like, and you don't have to pay a fee for that. It's absolutely free as long as you adhere to our republishing guidelines. And those are the 2 main ones. And the one is that you don't change anything on the article. And that's because we, as the editors of the conversation, have had this engagement with you to say, hey, we're happy with your article, you happy with your article, let's publish and let's put it out into the world. So you know that whatever's out there, you're happy with it, you've approved it, it's going out in that same format. The second rule is that they have to credit you as the academic. So they have to say this article was published in the conversation, but they have to say Prof Zayd, who is from CPUT, wrote this article and it originally appeared on the conversation. Now that Creative Commons model is something that's done us a lot of good at the conversation. It means that we have been able to get quite a significant reach in the last 8 years that we've been running the conversation, Africa specifically. Just some numbers that you can see on the screen that talks to that Creative Commons model. The first is the 1.5 million. Now, that means that we get 1.5 million people across the world reading the content on the Conversation Africa's website every single month. 1.5 million people across the world get content from the conversation through the republishers, and we'll chat about the republishers in the next slide. It will all make sense, but 1.5 million people access our content across the world. Of those 1.5 million, 900,000 come directly to the Conversation Africa's site. So they come to our site, they subscribe to our newsletter, they come to our site every day and troll our site looking for content, and that's where they get their site. So that's on the public side. On the internal side, how big is the network of people that have written for us, of academics? So far, in 8 years, we've had 6,103 authors, write about 9,176 articles. Now, that's quite a number of articles, it's just over 1,000 articles a year since we started in 2015. And you can see that the number of authors versus the number of published articles is not the same, because often when academics write one article for us, they realize that it's such a good and such a fulfilling experience that they actually prefer to write more than one article. They then go on to write 2 to 3 articles, as is the case with Prof Zayd. In 2019, we decided that writing was not enough for us. And we then decided to diversify our content versions of our content. We then launched a podcast called Pasha. Now, Pasha means, in Swahili, it means to inform. And that podcast has been running strong. We've got more than 116 episodes and more than 250,000 listeners across the world. And that's very similar to our content, but we'll talk a little bit about the content forms later. But those are some of our key numbers in terms of how the Conversation Africa works, the reach that we have globally. And we'll talk about that reach more as we go through the presentation today. Now, I told you that we have people come to our site and they republish our work. Now, we've got some of the biggest and best media outlets on the continent coming to the Conversation Africa to pick content and to publish it on their own sites. Some of them will be familiar on the screen. News 24, you're bound to see INL, ENCA, which is a TV brand. Broadcast media, they also use our material. We have the Daily Nation in Kenya. We've got the Graphic Online in Ghana. We've got the Premium Times in Nigeria. You'll see that these are established media outlets who come to our site because they know 2 things. They know that the content that they're going to get is evidence-based, it's based on research, It's based on valid information that they can trust. And the second thing is that they know that the editing of those articles has been up to par, it's been up to scratch, that some of the best editors in the world have touched that content, and that when they put it on their pages, they're not going to have to worry about whether or not there are spelling mistakes, whether or not the content is compromised in any way. And that's what that means for them. So they get this great content from the Conversation Africa, and the world gets some wonderful content from our academics. At the moment, we've got more than 800 republishers across the world. And I can tell you that 95% of our content is republished by at least 2 republishers. So there's not a single academic who's written for the Conversation who can say that they haven't actually had they haven't had a reach through the Conversation. They've definitely gotten their work published in other places. So how do we benefit academics? How does our platform actually benefit academics and researchers like yourselves? Because that's why you've come here today, to find out how this works and how you can actually do it. So let's start there. Before I get into the how, I'll tell you a little bit about how it benefits and what the benefits are. We do an author survey each year. We're about to start our new author survey on Monday or Tuesday. But we ask academics, when you publish on the Conversation Africa site, what does that mean for you? How did it work out? What was the offshoots from that? We often find, and what the academics have told us who we've interviewed, is that 48% of them have been given newspaper interviews or been asked to write further for newspapers. So they've had engagement with newspapers as a result of writing for the Conversation. 62% have had engagement on radio. 10% have actually gotten policy consultations. So government officials, government departments have come to them to say, hi, we loved your article on the Conversation. We loved what you said about this. Can you give us a policy brief on this? Or can you come and engage with us within the department to talk about what's happened and what your research has found? And the other 22% say that they've had research collaboration. And that's something that has taken place since 2015 when we first launched. People come to you to say, wow, I love your piece. Let's do a follow-up piece of research which looks at another element that you may not have touched in that. So that's some of the broad impact. And we also track our impact of our authors quite significantly. We ask them to fill out a form. We have an impact tracker that says, what happens to them. So aside from the radio, newspaper interviews, the policy consultations, they can tell us all sorts of things. Some of them get invited to do other lectures, to do international lectures. We've had one academic who's been flown all around the world based on the article that he's written for us. So there is definitely an impact once you've written for the Conversation. Now, I've taken one of Prof Zayd's articles because I wanted to show you what happens to an article when you're on the site. So this is a typical article on the site. When you write for the Conversation, as you can see, Prof Zayd's the author of this article, and his little byline is on the screen. On the right-hand side of the screen, his byline is there, his university affiliation is there, and he is then, anybody who wants to go into his profile can click on his name or his picture and see his entire profile. They can get contact details for him. He decides whether or not he wants his mobile number public or whether he only wants his email, or if he doesn't want his email, he doesn't have to, but the choice is there for him to do so. But your contact details are there so people can reach out to you directly. Sometimes they also come through us, and they often come through me as the Strategic Initiatives Editor. And they ask us, can you reach me out to Prof Zayd? We want to do an interview with him. I will then phone Prof Zayd and say, hi, Prof Zayd, so-and-so 702 radio wants to talk to you. Can you avail yourself at this time? And he will then say yes or no, and I'll then facilitate that engagement. Be that as it may, I'm getting lost in detail. This is the article, Prof Zayd's article. Now, his article has, and this is one of the coolest things of the Conversation, is that we have a metric that tracks how people read your article. And that's why we can tell you those wonderful numbers that we have 1.5 million people reading our site every day. So he then has what we call a personal dashboard. And Prof Zayd has got quite a prolific, nice dashboard that you can see. This personal dashboard tracks all the articles that you've ever written for the Conversation, and it gives you all the metrics that you need to succeed, if I can put it that way. So as you can see, Prof Zayd has written 5 articles. Those 5 articles have garnered 54 1,000 readers across the world already. And that's a number that consistently grows. Each time a new person reads an article, each time a new publisher republishes it, that number will grow on our site. And it will obviously grow on the site that it's been published on, but it will also then grow on our site. So he can track where his articles are being read, and you can see he's got a readership in South Africa, the US, Australia, and France. He can tell which publications have republished him. So the Skills Portal has republished him, Flipboard has republished him, the Daily Maverick in South Africa has republished him, the Star in Kenya, Biz Community, and All Africa. So those are just a few of the sites. And when his dashboard is an active one, so he can scroll through it. He can click on each article and see what readership and what where the readership is for each article, but he can also give himself an overview. Now, this is a really cool tool for you as an academic, as a researcher who is trying to get funding, who's trying to find out what is their share of voice. When you want to use this, you have access to this dashboard all the time, and you can use it. You can tell people, you know what, actually, I did this one article and it got 14,000 reads. I did an article about teachers can change lives. I got 14,000 reads, and this is where people read it. This is who found it most interesting. That is gold for an academic, for a researcher, because you can tell them, you know, actually, my share of voice is out there. I've got a space in the pie, which is something that obviously academics all do. You become a researcher to change the world, or to change, or to solve a certain type of problem. And you can now say, actually, I am trying to solve that problem by reaching researchers and by reaching the public in a certain space. Just in addition to Prof Zayd's to you having your personal dashboard, the university that you're associated with also gets its own dashboard. So I've now taken a different dashboard, not of CPUT, but of UKZN, and they can then see, the university then gets details on all the academics of theirs that have published. So you can see at UKZN, 151 articles written by 107 authors, 2.5 million reads across time. And this is since the conversation started. So it's also nice to know that when you are publishing with a conversation, your leaders at your institutions are also getting access to the work that you're doing. They're also getting time to see that actually you are contributing to the public space in terms of the voice, community voice around your research. And they are able to track this as well. And we send them this, I think we send them an impact dashboard once a month, but we send them a very detailed impact dashboard once a quarter. And then we also send them an entire report for the entire year. So you get a dashboard, your institution gets a dashboard, and we'll chat a little bit more. If there is maybe there's some questions now. Can I open for questions, Prof Zayd? Is that okay? Just a little bit, just to check if there's any questions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that, Candice. Are there questions at this point in time? If there are questions, you are welcome to use the chat.
Oh, Victoria, that's such a nice comment. I don't think there are any questions. Are there? No?
Okay, can I come in?
Of
Thank
course
you, Candice. Thank you so much. Mine is actually not a question. It's actually a comment.
Sure.
I'm currently in Namibia, and I'm so thrilled to have been part of this conversation. We don't really get much of opportunity and platforms into which we can write and send information that we have written to. Newspapers are so much critical this side. I don't know whether this is the same in South Africa, but this is actually a good platform for one as an academician to start off putting down what you have in mind, what you have that needs to be, you know, critically analyzed and so forth, so that it can go further, be republished elsewhere. And you know, it's just such a good gesture, and it's a nice opportunity that is being given to us as academicians, and we should really use it, because that is how we also ought to contribute to whatever that we need to contribute out there. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Perfect. I'm so glad that we've got people from across the continent here. I see people from Eswatini. Thank you, Victoria, for your comment. That's wonderful. I think we're going to move on to the next part of our presentation. Let me have one more sip of water. Thank you so much. So I've told you a bit about the conversation, how it works broadly. why it's such a cool product. And now we want to go into a little bit more detail to look at how we do what we do. So why we do what we do and how we get to help you. So before we get there, I want to just talk a little bit about science communication and why it matters. So obviously, at the conversation, we acknowledge that your publishing in journal publications are critical for you. We have to publish in journals. It's what gives us academic rigor. In order to progress on the academic landscape, on the academic ladder, we do need to publish in journals. And at the conversation, we say that that is completely the most important part of your research, is to publish in journals. But we're saying you also need to publish outside of journals. You need to take the work that has been put in those journals and come and bring it to us and share it with us so that we can share it with the world. Because if people don't know what you've done in your research, what is the point? We as scientists and as researchers, as academics, we've come into the world to solve a specific problem or to fix the world in some way. And what we need to do then is, if we fix the world, we need to tell the world how we fixed it. And the only way you can do that, well, there are many other platforms that you can do it, but I think the conversation is one of the best platforms to do so. And I am biased, but I do think it's one of the best platforms to do so because of the way we manage you and because of the way we manage the entire process. So why is science communication such an important platform? At the conversation, we've realized that it helps you build your brand. So you've spent all this time doing your PhD, between 3 and 8 and 10 years doing your PhD. You've collated all this information and knowledge, but people don't know about you. So you have to build a brand. And that's part of the writing for the conversation. Sharing your work in the public domain is part of building your brand and profile as an academic on the continent, globally. You showcase the work that you've done. You're telling people, I'm out there, I've done this work, I am the expert, I know how to do this. Secondly, it contributes to your academic standing. Now, we often have this engagement with academics in South Africa who say that, well, writing for the conversation is not going to give me an A rating. It's not going to make me a Y-rated scholar like Prof Zayd, so why should I do it? Let me tell you that the National Research Foundation is one of the Conversation Africa's donors. It's one of our big donors. And they have acknowledged us because they say that it's not only about academic publishing. Academic publishing is as important as what your share of voice is. What is your community engagement is what the National Research Foundation calls it. So how are you engaging with the community about the work that you're doing? So although it's not going to give you a rating, it's going to give you the credence when you are applying for NRF's funding, when you are applying for other funding, to say, actually, I've got a share of voice within the community. I do in community engagement through the work of the conversation. General public get to read my work, they get to see. What it also does is it gets you to help to share your knowledge as a knowledge bearer, but it also gets you to develop a voice. So often as academics, we have this research that we've done, but we don't know how to talk about it to ordinary people. We don't know how to share it with the world. And often, when we try and talk about it, we come up with jargonistic terms of jargon that, we just don't know how to tell people, this is what I'm doing work on access to information and democracy. So it helps you develop a voice around your research and tell people what you're doing in an easy to understand manner. It also then builds an engagement with the public, with policymakers, and with other academics. We have quite a significant number of academics that are on the site, but I must tell you that our biggest cohort of readers on the Conversation Africa site is between the ages of 18 and 35. So this is people who have just finished high school. They are keen to know what's happening in the world, but they don't want to read a journal article. All they want to do is they want to understand what happens, what the journal article was about, but they want to do it through a popular media in a way that they can understand it easily. It also helps you be more accountable for your research. So obviously, as people who often get funding, academics need to they need to be accountable about that funding. What did they find? What did they use the money for that they did the research? What was the research that they did on? What did they do the money? What did they use with that money? And what were the outcomes? What were the findings of that research? How is that finding or those findings, how are they going to impact society? So I think that the conversation helps you tick all these boxes, build your brand, build your profile in South Africa, in Africa, and across the world by sharing your knowledge with people who don't necessarily know about your research, but who can benefit from your research in some or other way. So let's talk about the Conversation Africa and how we do it. So there are two broad areas of articles that we publish on the Conversation Africa website. 50% of them is research and 50% of them is news analysis. Now, research is published from your journal article. It's your journal article. Just mute Joseph.
We are trying to mute whoever this person is. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to give it a few seconds so that. We publish news analysis and we publish research on the Conversation Africa site. It's a little bit, there we go. Thanks so much, Mphoentle. Sorry about that, colleague.
Thank you, Maureen.
No worries, no worries, no worries. It happens all the time. Research and news analysis. Research is obviously your article published in the journal that you've now decided to share with the world and say, okay, Candice, let's write about my research from this journal article and we'll do a version that people can understand. News analysis is a little bit different. So it works on what's happening in the world, but you still use your expertise to say, hey, I'm an expert in this. I'm a democratic theorist. I'm a democratic scientist. And I actually, what's happening in these elections, actually, I can unpack this and help you understand it because this is what I know as an expert. So it's commenting on things that happen in the world as the world happens, using your expertise. So we will never ask you to publish news analysis on an area that you are not familiar with. If you are a public health scientist, we will never ask you to comment on an architecture, something in architecture or something in engineering. We'll only ever ask you to comment on something that works in your area of expertise. And we try and make sure that we're showcasing your work. As I said to you, you are the showstopper here. So we're trying to make sure that you get to showcase your expertise in a specific field, whether it's through your research or through news analysis. Now, through those two types of articles, we publish a whole series of articles and versions of articles, if I can put it that way. The first, and I'm going to start on the left-hand side and move all the way forward. No, I'm going to start on the right and move towards the left. Book reviews speaks for itself. You've published a book on a specific topic. You think it's great. Send it to the conversation team. We'll find an expert who can then write about it, who can then review it and share it with the world and give people a teaser as to what it's about, why it works, why it's really cool. An explainer. So often there are things that happen in the world, and this would be a news analysis, things that happen in the world, and we want to say, what does this mean? You know, what are the points of this that we should know about? So, for example, it might be a constitutional court battle that our former president, Jacob Zuma, has been engaged in. So we'll publish an explainer that says, you know, these are the 10 processes that led to this place where we are now in terms of Jacob Zuma's court case. And this is what you should know about it. This is why it's important. A Q&A, sometimes we recognize that you don't have time to write an article. So at this point, I'll just stop and say that all articles on the Conversation Africa site is 800 words to 1,000 words long. None of them are more than 1,000 words long. But it's nice to know that it's a little bit more than an abstract. It's not as technical as an abstract, but it's all 800 to 1,000 words long. But sometimes we recognize that you can't conceptualize an article in a short time, and it's something that's happening in the world, and we want you to write about it, immediately so that we can get an analysis out on it. So we'll say, can we send you 4 questions? And you can answer those 4 questions. And in that way, we'll then get the work out in the public domain. You'll still showcase your expertise, and we'll have an article within no time. So those 4 questions would be 4 200-word answers, and that would make up your 800 words, and Bob's your uncle will have an article. So it might be that there's a TB report that's been released and you are a vaccinologist. So we can talk about what does the TB report mean for South Africa? What does it mean for Africa? What does it mean for a certain part of Africa? And we'll answer that through those 4 questions. Academic interviews, sometimes we recognize that there are people that you know that are prominent that you want to interview. So we'll say to you, let's go ahead. We've had Bill Gates being interviewed. We've had the Reserve Bank governor being interviewed. We've had, who else? We've had the SARS commissioner, Edward Kieswetter, being interviewed. So you as an academic can have academic interviews with peers or with well-known people if you can set it up. And basically, we'll guide you on the questions, make sure that we work around it. and put those out in the public domain. Podcasts work exactly like normal articles, except we have an editor who asks you questions. We do it either in person or we do it via Zoom, and we edit it and put it out there. Our podcasts are about 20 minutes long, and it covers a topic. We try and keep it as simple as possible. We keep it down to about 4 to 5 questions. But we try and make sure that people understand your issue through it. The last circle on my screen is the Curious Kids Circle. So if you remember at the beginning of our session, I said, if you're running your kids' creche website, you can use the content on the conversation, and you must have thought I was crazy. But what the Curious Kids section of our site does is it gets questions that 4 to 6-year-olds have that are really interesting, that are really out there, and we pair them up with an academic expert who can then answer those questions. So we've had a variety of questions come from 4-year-olds, and 4-year-olds have got tons and tons and tons of questions. We've had, why do we not have enough female presidents? We've had, do our dogs and cats understand us when we speak English to them? We've had, how are planets formed? So all types of questions. Why does lightning strike so loudly? So we've had all types of questions, and you can go find them on the site and you'll see how cute they are for those 4 to 6-year-olds to answer. But it's also a nice way, once again, for you to showcase your expertise in the public domain. I see that there's a question about the fee that's attached to the conversation. The beauty of the conversation is that it's absolutely free to engage with us. We are a donor model, so we have, in fact, we have 12 universities in South Africa that fund us, that give us a donation each year. CPUT is one of them, UNISA is another one of them. And they give us donations so that we can do the work that we do. We also then get funding from the NRF. We get funding from the Gates Foundation, a couple of other foundations as well. But we are a donor model. We are there for the public good, to showcase your work as the public. Now, it doesn't mean if your university does not fund us that we do not engage with you. We still engage with you whether or not your university funds us. The donation from your universities are really just a nice to have, and it helps us run our operation. There are lots of African universities that are unable to fund us, so we then barter with them in other kinds of ways. When universities do fund us, we do writing workshops with the academics at those workshops so that they can teach the academics how to write for us and give them a bit of a value add. Now, a bit more about the process around the conversation. I want to tell you, and I can't reiterate this enough, the engagement with the conversation, it's a collaborative process. We as editors are not there to scoop you in any ways, to make you look silly, to make ourselves look good. We are there, we are a public good organization, we're there to make you look good. So what we do is we work with you from the pitch, from the idea of your article, all the way through to the publishing process. So from pitch to publishing, to help you engage in this process and to feel comfortable around this process. What happens is there are a couple of ways that us as editors engage with you as the academics, as the researchers. We go through Google Scholar and other databases like Taylor and Francis, JSTOR, looking for articles that are of interest to us that we can say, can we publish this on the conversation? So can we approach Victoria based on this research that I've found on Google Scholar and ask her to write about her research for the conversation? So we then also engage with universities. So those universities that we have partnerships with, we go through their comms departments, through their research departments, saying, what's happening? What research has come out of your site? Does this, can we find an academics that have done this work? Can you link us up with these academics so that we can put their work in the public domain? That's the second way that we engage with you. The third way is that we actually just wait for you to come to us. And when you come to us, it's you actually come and pitch an idea to us. So you would then go, and I'll speak about the pitch platform at the end of our session, but we've got a lovely online system that allows you to pitch an idea into our system. We then work with you through this process. So whether you come to us, whether we come to you, whether we get to you via your communications or research departments at your university, we like to engage with you, and we like to have an entire process in terms of how we work with you. we start off with what we call a pitch. Now, as you can see on the screen, and these are some of my training slides, but I thought I'd give them to you because I thought it might be helpful, just to give you a bit of an insight in terms of how we think about your research. When you come to us, or when we come to you, we would work with what we call a pitch. It's a 2-paragraph summary that explains why you are wanting to write the article you want to write for us at the conversation. It will be an explanation about your research, but also a justification saying, this is what's happened in the world right now. TB is on my mind. I've been editing a TB report. So, this TB, I've published this work on TB because there's a new vaccine that's been found that can tackle TB. And this is why it's important. 300,000 people are dying from TB each year in South Africa. So this is why this is an important article to write now. My research shows why this new vaccine or this new injection is really going to help us tackle that 300,000 deaths each year. So it's a justification to us to say, hey, this is why I want to do what I want to do for you. The pitch process is a very important process for us at the conversation because it helps us engage with you. From here, we get into a space where we find what we call a brief based on this pitch. We agree on a brief, and we then are able to say to you, Victoria, let's write about this part of your pitch. This is how long it should be, 800 words. This is the deadline that you can agree to writing it because it works for you. And this is what you should be writing about. Sometimes we get unsolicited articles at the conversation, so people haven't done any engagement with us. They've just sent us an article and we then have to work from scratch. It does make the editing process that we engage with you on a little bit longer. So when we have a pitch, when we have an engagement with you, we can say, let me stop there and say that your research, for example, any published article that you have is maybe 16 to 20 pages long. In that 16 to 20 pages long, you could probably have maybe 6 or 7 different potential articles. Now, 6 or 7, a 20-page research paper can't fit into an 800-word article, into one single 800-word article. So our job at the conversation is to work collaboratively with you to say, how do we take your 20 pages and say, what is the one thing we focus on for this article? To tell you, this is the one thing that's important for this article. Let's engage in this issue. So we basically whittle it down and narrow it down so that you can understand what you should be focusing on for this article. That's what makes it easy to read. It's what makes it easy to understand. It's easy to, I'm just going to stop so that we can just give. Okay, Joseph is gone again. Joseph is very busy this afternoon. But it's so that we can get a focus for your article so that we can make it easy to read and easy to understand. It's helpful because it means that the person who's going to read your article, whether they are a scientist or they are non-scientists, they're still going to be able to understand your work because of the way we have engaged with you, we've framed it, we've edited this article to make it understandable and palatable for non-scientists. So we will work with you from the pitch process. And once you send a pitch through to the conversation site, it will go to an editor who will work with you throughout that process. That editor will consistently engage with you. They'll consistently tell you, you know what, I don't think that this is relevant, or can you explain this? Can you help us understand what this is about, why this is important, why this even matters? We will hold your hand through the process. And I'm hoping that Prof Zayd and Mphoentle, if they do give testimonials, will tell you exactly how we do hand-holding through the process of the conversation. As I said, we're not there to make ourselves look good, but we're there to make you look good. So we are going to do whatever we can and whatever we need to make sure that you look good. Now on your screen is a pitch that I got. I think I used it for training a few weeks ago. I'm just going to have a sip of water. And this pitch is a pitch you can see. The reason why I've put it up is because I wanted to tell you what happens when we get a pitch. So when you pitch to us at the conversation, what does that mean? You send us this, there's a form that you fill out on our site that will ask you, what is your research about? What makes it relevant? What's its significance? Why does it matter? What are your points, your talking points? Once you put that in, this email comes to us and we then evaluate this pitch and we then say, okay, this is what you haven't done. This is where you've maybe, you're focusing too wide. Let's zone in on something here, on this one area. But before we even do that, we make sure that you qualify to write for the conversation. So we ask ourselves 3 questions. Does Victoria, is she affiliated to an academic institution? That's the first criteria. The second criteria is she a PhD, like in a PhD who's in a final year? Is she a postdoc? Is she a lecturer at the university? Where does she fit into the academic landscape? So is she a teacher? Is she a professor? What is her affiliation to the university? So she isn't at the university, but how is she? If you're an administrative staff, we'll say you can't write for the conversation because you're not an expert. We want experts, and to qualify for the conversation, to write for the conversation, you have to be a PhD and above. Now, the caveat on that is that some people are lecturers, but they are doing them. They only have a master's, but they're lecturers. So they've been a lecturer or researcher at university for more than 5 years. In that case, you do qualify to write for the conversation because you are still considered an expert. So we'll still check your qualification criteria. Do you have a master's? Do you have a PhD? Where do you fit in? And the third question that we'll ask ourselves is this your area of expertise? So is this something that you have published on, and is this published research? So you may be, and I see the question from Victoria, can I write about work that's still in progress? No, you'd need to write about something that has been published already. So once your thesis has been submitted to your faculty and it's on the wireframe of the university, you can write about it because it would have been considered peer-reviewed. But the point is that you have to go through the peer review process to say that your research does qualify, it's been peer reviewed, and you can write about it. If you're writing about a news analysis piece, so you're writing about a security issue that's happened somewhere, we would still say, do you have expertise in this specific area before we then look at your pitch and engage with you? So you'd have to have expertise in that area. So we get this pitch and we then engage with you. We'd come back to you to say, okay, I like what you're saying about this. I think that you're covering too much ground. And you'd see on the feedback that I gave her, I said, I think you didn't include your findings. So although you've told me about your research and what it's about and why it's important, you haven't told me what you found. And that for me would be the most important part, is your findings. I can't stress this enough for you, colleagues. When you are writing for an academic paper, when you're compiling an academic paper, you have a certain format that you go through. You go through the introduction, you go through your methodology, you go through your limitations, you then go into your discussion, and then you go into your findings. But when you're writing for the ordinary public, you have to start with your findings because that's what you wanted to find out. What did you want to find out and how did you find it? So we will then work through that, make sure that you include those things, those types of things in your pitch, but also then in your final article that you finally submit. The pitch feedback process is quite a significant process for us at the conversation. It doesn't only mean that when you get feedback from the conversation, it's not only Candice's opinion. Once you've sent your pitch to me, I evaluate it, I take it, I do an analysis on it. I then send it to my editors and I say to them, this is what Victoria's pitch was about. I liked it. I think that it ticks all the boxes. It's published work. She's an expert in this area. She's got her findings. Everything is there. I'm ready to go. And they will then give me feedback to say, okay, but you didn't think about this, or you didn't think about that, or maybe you can ask Victoria to include this as well. And we'll then send you feedback. It's important to know that when you get engagement from anybody at the conversation, it's not based on an individual's opinion, but on a collective of decisions that come from editors who have years and years and years of experience and know what works in terms of writing for the media and for the public. And we do this, and I wanted to include, so importantly, it was very clear to me, include some things that will make it interesting for my colleagues to understand why this is such an important platform and how and what it means for them. So I put this slide in because I wanted to tell you that the editing process that we go through at the conversation is a rigorous process. All the editors have not been editors for less than 15 years. So they have a significant amount of knowledge in terms of how to write for the public, how people consume news and information and what makes it interesting for them. And that's what we do at the conversation. We ask you the critical questions to make sure that your research, that you drill down into your research and find the bits of your research that are most interesting for the people out there. And then we published a piece of research, an article based on a piece of research in 2015. The title of the article was "Why you shouldn't warm your food in tin foil, aluminium tin foil in the microwave. And because of the way we edited this article, because of the way we put the headline, the research was not about warming your food in tin foil in the microwave. It was a piece of chemistry research, but it was a very interesting thing that came out of the research. And the way that research was framed resulted in it getting over 1 million reads over the past 6 or 8 years. So the point of my story is that it's how you frame your research. It's how you talk about your research. You know, if you are going to go to the local supermarket asking a colleague, and you meet an old friend from high school, and they say, "Oh, Mphoentle, what are you doing these days?" You know, you're not going to give them the technical jargon that says, "I'm doing a chemistry study that looks at what." You're going to give them I'm trying to find a gene that does this or this or that or that. You know, you're going to give them the elevator pitch version. And that is what we try and do at the conversation, is to give you that editing that helps you understand how do you break down your research for a 16-year-old to understand what you're working on and make them understand why this is important for them and why it matters. We spend a lot of time in terms of editing. We don't just put in spaces and do spell checks for you. You can do that on your own. We unpack your research. We make sure that there's no jargon. We make sure that there's no complications, that ordinary people, non-scientists can understand that. Sometimes people tell us that we are dumbing down their work, and what we can confidently say back to them is that we're not dumbing down your work. We're simplifying the language so that ordinary people can understand it and understand why it matters for them. And that's part of democratizing knowledge, is helping people, everybody understand it, and not just a certain cohort of people. Of course, your peers, of course, your academic peers understand your work. They are meant to understand your work. You know, that's what they do. And they sometimes do come to the conversation site to read that. We find that we do have a massive, a big cohort of academics that come to the site and read their peers' work. But we also want the ordinary person on the street to be able to understand your research. And that's what we do with you. We engage with you on that process. We help you focus on the important things in your research. So getting a golden thread. And if you've ever been through an editor, they'd say, get a golden thread. What is a golden thread? It's when you have an angle for your research and you are able to have the same angle and argument that runs from the beginning of the article through the middle and to the end. So that people have the same idea. You're not bringing in new ideas later. We're not bringing in, introducing new concepts at the end of the research. You're bringing in it all at the beginning and keeping it into the middle and then running all the way to the end. So we try and make sure that we get that golden thread for you. So once again, to reiterate this, it's a collaborative process. We work through it so that you can feel comfortable. So we're not trying to distort your research. But we're trying to make sure that it's unpacked in a way that ordinary people can understand. We also spend a lot of time thinking about what's happening in the world. So if you are, and I'm sorry, colleagues, I've been a health academic for a long time, so I always think in terms of health. Not a health editor, not a health academic. So it's World AIDS Day. Are you a scholar who's done public health work in HIV? So if you are, we'd come to you and say, let's write about your research now because it's World AIDS Day. The publishers are going to come to our site to get content, fresh content on what's happening in the world of HIV. What's the newest research? What's the latest research there? So we want to have that on our site. So we will push you to say, Victoria, it's World AIDS Day in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks' time, in a month's time. Can we write about your research? Can we find that hook? Can we find that area to focus on? Have you published this paper yet? You know, let's chat about it. We try and keep our engagement with you. We at the end of the day, we're journalists. So we try and make sure that we keep contact with you and keep an engagement with you so that when you have new research, it comes out at the right time. Now, I have to say this caveat, I have to put out this caveat. Not all research is important. It's not all linked to a specific day. So not all research is linked to something that's happening somewhere in the world. And we acknowledge that. Sometimes research is just fascinating because it's fascinating. The other day we had a piece of research, or an article about a piece of research on how grasshoppers' mating habits are changing because of the noise levels in cities. And it was based on something happening in the Western Cape. So grasshoppers are now mating late at night, and they are changing the sounds that they make to find mates because of noise that taxis make and noises in the street. That's not linked to there's no grasshopper awareness day. There's no, National Grasshopper Day. It's just based on something that's interesting, that's fun, that's wow to read. So some research is just evergreen, and we acknowledge that. So sometimes it doesn't matter if there isn't a day. People will still come and find your research when it comes to that day. But sometimes if it is linked to a day, it's nice to be able to use it. And we track that to make sure that we put it out there at the right time so that you can get all the reads that you need to get. The last part of my presentation, and I think I've spoken for quite a while, is submitting a pitch. We have a pitch portal. So our entire site is an online site. Everything is done online. When you submit an article to us, it goes onto the back end of our online system. We add you to it. You are able to see the comments we make, the edits we make. You're able to watch us with a hawk's eye to see that we make comments that really work for you. And when we put those, when we add you to that article, you are able to come, we're able to ask you questions and say, importantly, you've missed a point here. Can you just explain what you mean by this line? Or can you just give us an explanation about what this piece of jargon means? So we're able to engage with you, and we're able to approve that process online. It starts with the pitching process, which is an online process. The link is there. I will share this presentation with Mphoentle. And she'll be able to share it with you with this pitch slide, with a link. You pitch online, you'll get feedback online, and we'll start the entire process. How long does it take? It depends on you. Sometimes an article can take an hour to publish. Sometimes it can take 10 days. I've had articles, I've still got some articles that are sitting in my inbox from 2015. The academics never came back to me. So it depends on you. If you have the time, we will push and we'll say, let's publish it and let's get it out as quickly as possible. But colleagues, I want to thank you for listening to me. I hope I wasn't too boring, and I hope that I gave you some information that helped you. And I'm going to hand over back to Prof Zayd. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
I hope your load shedding is not killing you.
No, I'm now back onto the Wi-Fi, so I'm okay for now. But firstly, thank you very much for your insightful presentation. I didn't know that you that you're the alma mater of CPUT, so thank you for letting me know that. I found your presentation to be quite informative. You were able to explain the history of the conversation up until the process, that I think is quite relevant, especially for researchers that are looking to publish in the conversation. So thank you again, and we look forward to engaging with you after Dr. Mphoentle talks about her experiences with regards to the conversation. But perhaps something I could also just mention, an oversight from my part was the fact that we have SAERA chairperson, and that is Professor Maureen Robinson. So she is present in this webinar, and she has been very helpful in terms of muting, unfortunately, individuals that are talking into the session. But in terms of the program, so I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mphoentle to talk briefly about experiences with regards to the conversations, and I will just share with you her bio as well. So Dr. Mphoentle Modise is a lecturer in the Department of Curriculum and Instructional Studies, College of Education at the University of South Africa. Mphoentle's research areas include faculty and student support in distance education, e-learning, open distance e-learning, academic professional development, educational technology integration and adoption, and the use of e-portfolios in teaching and learning. We also have an interest in massive open online courses and open education resources. He is a member of the South African Education Research Association, SAERA, as an executive committee member, where she represents the needs and interests of early career researchers in South Africa and other African countries. She received prestigious awards for her outstanding PhD thesis from SAERA and Education Association of South Africa YASA in 2022. They have also recently received the Women in Research Emerging Research Award for Excellence in Research 2023 at UNISA. So I will hand over to Dr. Mphoentle, and then I'll take over from her, and then we'll have a Q&A as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof Zayd. Thank you so much, Dr. Candice. This was so beautiful. I was sitting here thinking, I didn't know that about the conversation. You did that too, about kids. The 4-year-old writing stuff to you guys. Wow, I didn't know about that, but here we are. This was very informative, very educational for me, and I've seen some of the comments on the chat that people are saying, wow, this is interesting. I'm also going to write. I saw people who are saying, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. So this is just a small testimony just to attest to what you were saying. It's always nice to hear people saying, we as the conversation, we do this, and then you put something there onto the on the presentation on our screens. But so it's always nice to know that there's somebody within the circle who can say, I have experienced that. So I think this session now is just a small testimony from me, just to say what you've been saying is true, and I personally have experienced it. And I'm as an ECR, I hope that I'll be one of those people that will also be flown all over the world because of my work, because through the partnership with the conversation. So here we are, colleagues. Yes, I started. I heard about the conversation from my institution, which is University of South Africa. We've got. I just want to believe that we have the best research support strategies at UNISA for academics. That is why I joined academia. I used to be an admin person until 2018. From 2012, I've been asking them that, look, I want to become an academic, and then they didn't want to listen to me, but eventually they couldn't ignore me any longer. So in 2018, I only became a lecturer, and here we are. I've been enjoying this writing, this producing of articles, this going out there, speaking to people, interviewing people, and doing research. And as I thought I was enjoying research, then the conversation workshop was brought in at UNISA with my first experience in 2022, last year. And then they told me, no, Mphoentle, you are writing these articles, but it's not reaching the broader community. You only are writing to other lecturers, other academics, and other researchers who have access to those journals that you guys are publishing in, but there's a lot more bigger platform for your work. And I was quite interested and excited. So that was in 2022. And this year, I think, yes, they published 2 of my articles. I'm not like Prof Zayd, I've just started. So I only have 2 articles that they've published. Today, as I'm speaking to you, I'll show you just now another screen. They had my 3rd one that they are publishing now. I think it will probably be finalized next week. So I received an email today from Natasha, one of the editors, to say, please approve this article and it will be published soon. I honestly believe that our research should not just end in journals. I know we're talking about, in academia, we talk about high impact journals. And I'm thinking, how high is that impact if it's not reaching the people that we write about and that we write for, which are the broader community, our teachers? For me, I'm writing for teachers, writing for policymakers, or even writing for my leaders to tell them, look, as an academic, this is what I need. What are you doing to make sure that my needs are attended to, so that I can be able to teach better and perform better in my work. So I think the conversation is a great vehicle for us to reach the broader communities, including NGOs, funders, Candice spoke about NRF. NRF is one of the biggest funders for research in South Africa. So, you know, if they are attached to the conversation, you can imagine the opportunities. And my stance, my stance excite me. Well, until I saw Prof Zayd's stats today, I was like, what, 54,000 readership? My goodness. Now my dream has just been expanded. I'm inspired and encouraged, you know, to pitch more ideas to the conversation. But for me, besides the numbers of people that are reading my work through the conversation, most importantly is the engagement that comes through that platform, you know, and I'll tell you about it just now. So this is the 3 articles that I produced and published with the conversation. You'll see the first one, I produced it, it was published on the 25th of January this year. And the second one was produced on in February. And now today, 28th of April today, I received that email to say, approve it. And as you see that I've approved it because it was well written, it was exciting me. I was reading it different. It didn't sound like it's the work that I've done. I'm like, what? They make it sound so nice, so better, so easy, and so easy to engage with, you know. So yes, today I approved my 3rd article. And this is the email. I just thought I should show you the email. As Candice has said, they won't do anything without you. It's a partnership, it's a collaboration. They always work with you as a researcher to say, are you happy with this? Can you please approve if you are happy? If not, tell us where we can tweak and rewrite and make it look nice. And so in the stairs, as I spoke about the stairs, at one stage in my life within the University of South Africa, one of my articles was topping the thing there. It was top on the list, you know, from January. If you can see from the day it was for the month of January, 25th January to the 25th of February, I had 5,000, almost 6,000 readership on one of my first article that I published with the conversation. Wow, for me it was like, what? This is interesting. How many people have actually read my article? The academic article that I produced, that this article was produced from. So this is quite interesting. And as Candice has shown you, all the other publishing houses that actually go on to their websites to source their, to source information or the work that they want to publish on their own platforms also. So this is the second one. In February, I was number 2, which is still exciting for me within the University of South Africa institution. So it looks at all the researchers or academics that have published within an institution, and they give you this beautiful stats. It's quite encouraging for me as an ECR. And of course, this one is from January to now. When I looked at it, it tells me that from January to April to today, my article, one of my articles has topped the list within UNISA. So it's quite interesting, it's quite encouraging, and I would really encourage you guys to go and start doing your pitch on the conversation website. Now, I wanted to show you something. We call it an academic article, we call it a title. But I heard today that the Candice within the Conversation Africa, they call it a headline. And that's what makes it interesting. Look at this. The first article that they published, my first article, the title there was saying continuous professional development and student support in an open and distance e-learning institution, a case study. Look what they changed it into. Online learning platforms aren't enough. Lecturers need the right technical skills. Who wouldn't want to read that? Who wouldn't want to open that and see, wow, what do they say? You know, the second one there, I wrote the potentiality of MOOCs as a tool for widening access to higher education in the African context. And this was a systematic review. And a systematic review is one of those up and coming method of research, which is now being used in education. It started in the medical arena. And for me, I was able to use the systematic review. Of course, I've used it for my PhD, and I'm producing articles using this method. I thought I'm clever, you know. until the conversation took it and tweaked it around and said free online courses could be a path to higher education in African countries, but awareness is low. So they take this long technical title and they change it into this simple headline that anybody else, my daughter can relate to this. Free online courses. But if she comes here, talk about MOOCs, she might look at me, I'm talking about my grade 11 daughter here. She might look at me and say, what is a MOOC? But if you say free online courses, it makes it easier for them to consume and understand what you're talking about. I think I got to my last slide today, but I just want to share something. I talked about the importance of engagement, versus the numbers of people that have read my article. Something very personal I want to share. Recently, in March, I received an email from a gentleman from Sanremo in Italy who was saying, I saw your article on the conversation where you're talking about professional development, about digital skills development. Can we talk? It was 30th of March, 21st of March, we had a Zoom meeting and he unpacked what he's doing. He's from the International Institute of Humanitarian Law. And I said to him, look, I know nothing about law. What are you about? He said, no, we are about international law, humanitarian law, but I want you to participate in my online course that we are going to launch in June. I want you to make a video for us talking about what you were talking in your article we saw on the conversations about skilling, about acquiring digital skills, about professional development. And I was like, I'm happy to do that. So you see, now Mphoentle is going to be on an international platform, talking about the importance of acquiring relevant digital skills, professional development, and all that, because of the conversation. That article has been published, is sitting somewhere in the journal. Very nice. I've got 1 point out of it, it might be used for my promotion within the UNISA. But outside of UNISA, how am I being, how is my work being consumed, or the impact it has outside the academic arena? So it's exciting for me. We can sit here and talk a lot about it, the conversation. I'm sure Prof Zayd has a lot to say also, but let me stop here and thank you so much again for being here. Thank you, Prof Zayd. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that testimonial. I think you've really grown in terms of writing your articles. You have now the third article that's going to be published. And I think you are doing fantastic. And you are serving essentially as an ambassador for your institution. And I look forward to reading your publications as well. So thank you again. From my side, I'm going to keep it fairly short, because I also want to give participants the opportunity to ask. Some have asked questions, but I also want to then hand over to Dr. Candice to respond to some of the questions. So a few years ago, I had this colleague, and we were just walking on campus, and then she was talking about writing an article. It was the first article, and then she published the article, and then she asked me the question now, so what? So what's going to happen? Who's going to read this article? And I remember at that time, it also made me think, we write for a specific audience. We write for other academics, as Candice mentioned as well. And that the jargon that we use in these publications, these journal articles, of course, are not cannot always be understood by the similar audience, for instance, in the context that we find ourselves in. And that, of course, made me then want to write in the conversation as an opportunity, because I see it as a platform towards allowing one get one's message across to the broader public. And so my experiences have been very positive from the review process. I think the editors have done a fantastic job. I've worked with Natasha Joseph, your colleague, Candice, and she's been fantastic in terms of trying to make something perhaps complex to, as I mentioned, the broader public in a more simpler way. And that made me think about this whole idea of defamiliarization, which is the pedagogical approach of looking at something familiar in an unfamiliar way. But then how do you explain even the context, the complex concept of defamiliarization itself to someone who's unaware of the concept itself? Also, the conversation has sort of made it a little bit more easier for me to explain academic jargon and to explain how my research has made it so, how my research can rather make an impact in society, because that is essentially why we engage in research. We look for opportunities towards addressing certain problems in society. So what sort of impact would our research then have on society? And it also made me think also what you mentioned about the idea of democratizing our knowledge. And I think it also ties into the whole idea of what is known as cognitive injustice in society, where people in certain instances are felt silenced, marginalized, excluded from specific discussion. And the whole idea of disrupting the status quo, I think the conversation assists in that regard by creating a platform for others' voices to be heard and to engage with others. So, for instance, as part of writing some of the articles in the conversation, I've been fortunate enough to have been invited as part of radio interviews. But perhaps what I can also mention was that one of the articles that I wrote last year was on a decolonizing pedagogical approach, which I mentioned is defamiliarization. And I remember after the article was published, I had this individual who emailed me to make contact with me because I wrote about the need to, of course, decolonize our pedagogical practices. And the individual who made contact with me, he was very interested to learn about this, my work. And then he mentioned to me that he was actually part of the Fees Must Fall campaign. And then he eventually invited me this year to what is known as the South African Student Solidarity Foundation, SASFI. So I've sort of also played it on in that regard, where I looked at supporting historically disadvantaged students in South African higher education institutions, especially with regard to assisting poorer students concerning access to higher education, particularly with regards to the fact that finances is a major stumbling block for many students. So that's sort of what I've realized. The conversation, it sort of really opens up pathways for you to engage with the wider public, and it's certainly an opportunity for you to reflect on your research, an opportunity for you to also think more broadly about how you can expand on your research in that regard. I also want to just mention some aspect that was also mentioned earlier by Candice with regards to the South African National Research Foundation. And one of the criteria that the NRF looks at, especially with regards to rating, is looking at your contribution to society. And again, the conversation is an excellent platform to allow you to showcase your research, so what you can do towards cultivating, for instance, my research, social justice in society. So I'm very grateful for the work that's been done by the editors in the conversation, and I do feel that as time progresses, I mean, it's a relatively new platform. It's not that old. And the fact that the conversation was able to generate such a large audience of 1.5 million readers is significant, and it's remarkable. And I would say that in the next 2 years, it will just, of course, continue to grow. But that's just from my side. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Candice Bailey to respond to some of these questions. So perhaps we can start with the first question that I read. So one of my students has published and would like to put in a pitch, but he has not finished his PhD yet. Can he be an author? Previously, I was told one needs to have a PhD. That's the first question. There's also a question about the slides, but I think answered.
Should I go ahead, and then we can just take it?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. I think you can go ahead, and then I'll yeah.
Yeah, I tried to answer the questions as they came into the chat box. Thank you very much for that question. Yes. So if your student is in the advanced parts of his PhD, so he's done data collection and you've published, for some people do PhDs via publication. So if he's published and he's in the advanced part of that PhD, he's nearly at the end, he can publish on the conversation. However, he would have to publish with you as his supervisor, because you are still considered the expert in this instance. He's still considered the learning, he's becoming an expert, so he's not an expert yet. So as long as he publishes with you as a co-publisher, then a co-author, sorry, that's the word I was looking for, then we're going to be fine.
All right. Thank you for that. That response, Candice.
Yeah. So have I answered your question, or do you think that do we need some more clarification? I
think we can continue.
Okay, no worries.
All right. Okay, there's another question about Victoria. Research completed or submitted to a university, should it only be for a PhD or even master's and honors? I suppose that's similar to what you sort of just responded to.
Yeah, kind of a little bit similar, Zayd, you're right. So if your PhD was a continuation of your master's. So often people do their master's and they continue doing their PhDs on the same topic, they just expand it. Then you can publish, you can write about your master's research. I will say to you that we try and get, when we're writing about published research, we try and keep it to about 2 or 3 years, in a 2 or 3 year range. So if you did your master's 15 years ago, and you know, it might not be relevant to society now because things may have changed, especially if you are doing something that's very stats heavy and the context around that master's has changed. We would be wary on it, but I would say to practice, maybe just send a pitch in and see what they say and see what the editors of the conversation say, what feedback they give you. Your enthusiasm is welcome, Victoria, so go ahead.
Thank you for that, Candice. I have a question.
Yeah.
I think also ties into what you mentioned earlier about the fact that you need researcher needs to sort of condense a 6,000 word article into an 800 to 1,000 word article for the conversation. Can you perhaps provide some form of advice in terms of guiding researchers in terms of how they can go about this process? Because every person writes differently. Like for instance, one of the articles that I wrote recently looked specifically at certain steps that could be put in place. And I've read another article similar to this. So could you perhaps provide some guidance in that?
So I will say the first thing, Zayd, I will say to you is that the The pitch and the brief process is important in this because that will guide us in terms of what the article is going to be about. So you've got this 6,000 word journal article and you're trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? You focus, you send us a pitch and it's got maybe 4 or 5 angles. I'm as the editor, I'm going to say, okay, Zayd, I like this angle and I like there's 2 things that are coming out. I see 3 different articles here. Let's focus the first article on this. So I'm gonna give you that angle as a start, and we're gonna agree. You're gonna say, but you're not considering this element of my research, and I'm gonna say, but that it's separate, or let's engage in terms of. So we will have that engagement. I think that the pitching process and that engagement is critical because it will really help you focus and narrow down. Because and often as academics we do this often. We give like a wide universe of an article so we start very wide, and for the conversations article we're gonna focus on the nugget of your research. It's going to be one nugget. It might not be like if you look at Mphoentle's article about COVID and experiences of Nigerian teachers during COVID. It was one element of a large article, I bet. There's probably many other, it was a systemic review, so there are probably many other elements that you could have written about, but it was only focusing on one element of, Nigerian academics, Nigerian teachers during COVID, what their experiences were. So that pitching process is it's an important step because it will help you focus your ideas. In terms of when you are writing, when you are sitting behind your computer and you have to write the article, you've now been given the brief, we've agreed on the angle, and now you're sitting there and you're like, oh gosh, I don't know where to start. The first thing to think about is providing context and background. So what is the context and background that's really important for us to understand why this is a big issue? So what has happened? Has there been a development in the past that's happened that will really help us understand why this issue at the moment is important? Is this something that's groundbreaking? Is this brand new research that's, it's novel research? We've never ever looked at how MOOCs are being used to teach, what is it that's new? So if it's brand new, then tell us, what? Nobody has ever done research on this. Or what? This builds on a body of research that exists. People have been looking at online teaching mechanisms for the last 15 years, but my research is different. So then you must tell us what is different about your research. It's a nice, helpful thing to go about saying, having a line in your article that says, what did you want to find in your study and what did you find? So in my study, I wanted to find out what the experiences of Nigerian teachers were during COVID in teaching online classes. Right? So that's what you wanted to find. That was your hypothesis from your study. You then want to bring it down to us and say, what did you find? What were your findings? That's the most important part. Actually, they found that it was easier than they thought. Or actually, they found that they don't have the skills to do this and they need to they need to go through new teachers training. Or actually, Nigeria doesn't have strong enough internet to be able to have this. So what were your findings? And the last thing that you would add there is then the so what. And you spoke about this earlier, Zayd, the so what? Why does this matter? Why do we need to know it? Because actually we're living in the post-COVID world and actually all kids are now teaching online, I was sitting with a grade 8 student yesterday and she was telling me she needed this tablet for school. And I said, but aren't you guys all at school now? Why do you need Google Classroom? She says, no, we submit all our classes online. And I was like, gosh, but you're sitting in class, but you're submitting your assignments online, so it's a post-COVID world. This is why it matters in terms of how we're teaching kids online, because kids are now being taught online in class and they're sitting there. So what is the so what? It's also good to give yourself to explain things like scale and perspective. So is there something that can show how things have changed? So what was the matric results? And this is particularly for South African audience, but what were the South African end of school results 10 years ago? How has it changed now? So, how do we compare apples to apples if we're looking at it, if that's the story you're writing about? Give us a scale or a perspective to show us how big the problem is or how much it matters. And the last piece of advice is to always try to exclude jargon. Often we don't think of jargon as jargon because it's, things that we know, so I'm trying to think of something that would be jargon. MOOC would be jargon, and obviously as an academic or as an education expert or a specialist, you guys would all know what a MOOC is, but people outside of your field do not necessarily know what a MOOC is. So it would be important to explain it, to say it's an online course that's accessed, whatever. Give us an explanation, tell us what it means or why it's important. So context and background, what you wanted to find, why you found it, what you found, why it matters, scale and perspective, and removing jargon. Those are the 6 things that I can tell you to help you focus your article and obviously get the angle from the editor. I hope that helps.
I think that's fantastic. I think that gives a clear guideline. And I think it will help a lot of people with regard to writing the first article. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Can I just ask one thing? I want to go on from that. Research analysis. Is it possible to sort of transfer your existing research and somehow look at research analysis, writing a research analysis article in regard to it?
On your specific research, or maybe I'm not understanding the question, perhaps maybe you can just rephrase it.
Sorry. So research analysis in terms of, let's say, what's currently happening in South Africa. Like you mentioned, if you're looking at, let's say, elections, and you've done research with regards to that specific field. How do you sort of, is it possible to write an article in that regard?
So the first thing would be is if you've done that analysis, if you've published that research analysis. So it might be a trend. You guys are in the education space. So it might be you've looked at the changes or the trends around online learning in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, since just pre-COVID and now COVID. So it might be that that's a trend. So you might have published that article. As soon as you've published an article about that, and your research analysis would obviously include your own research over the time, that would be fine. You can obviously include it. A lot of the time, it's also about timing, Prof Zayd, if I can put it that way. So, you know, it's when we, sometimes it's not a lot of the time, some of the time it's about timing. So does it matter because something's happening now? You know, there might be a new education policy that's been pushed by the Education Department, the Department of Higher Education. So it now makes it relevant. So if you have it in that context, it might be like, okay, but this is important for us. So I hope that helps you.
No, it does. Thank you for that. I was just thinking, the reason I asked that because everyone nowadays is writing about AI.
Yeah.
So your research, for instance, could be on, say, educational technology, but you haven't done research on AI. And so therefore, my understanding with the research analysis, you could perhaps give your insight in terms of the current context in relation to what you've done, although you haven't explored AI.
Look, I think there's a space for it if you have expertise. And what I will say is that, I mean, the editors of the conversation are quite clued up in terms of looking at whether or not you're an expert on this. So they will ask you the necessary questions. I mean, AI is a big field. It's like everybody wants to write about AI at the moment. We're getting pictures left, right, and center about ChatGPT and AI. So I think that they are being very cautious about who actually is an expert to write on it. So they would say, I mean, have you done work on what have you done work on in terms of this? And they will evaluate that and give you the outcome. Sometimes people are not happy with that feedback because they feel prejudiced. But you know, I think that they make a judgment call based on an article-to-article basis.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I think just one last question.
Sure.
What about multidisciplinary research areas? How do you determine expert in that instance? That was by Donovan and Peterson.
Donovan, thank you for the very difficult question. This is like one that it always gets us because you're absolutely right. Multidisciplinary research is quite a hard thing because sometimes, you know, an academic thinks that they believe that they are a transdisciplinary researcher and we can't prove it. They can't prove it. You have to have published across the areas. And that's really what I can tell you. They handle it on a case-by-case basis, Donovan, but you have to show that you have done work across the areas so that we can see you've published on the one side and you've published on the other side. And that's what makes you an expert in both fields. Or across fields, because there might be more than one. It's complicated, but also case by case. Pitch through, you can always get feedback. And you know what? The editors of the conversation are all like me. We need copy. If I can tell you that, colleagues, we publish 6 to 8 new articles a day, which means we need 6 to 8 new academics every day to write for us. So we are always in need of copy. So our job is not to say no. It's kind of to try and say yes all the time. And we try and say yes as much as possible because we just want to get your work out there. It's just that we want to make sure that you tick all the boxes, that you are the expert that you say you are in that specific field.
Thank you very much for that response. Looks like Mphoentle, you've got a question there?
Yes, thank you so much, Zaid. Candice, I just confirm, in terms of submitting a pitch to the conversation, the PhD, a published PhD, it's fine. It doesn't have to be an article. Is that correct?
Once you have published, once you have submitted, thank you, Mpho, that's a perfect question. Once you've submitted your PhD to the university, it's been marked and it's now sitting on the wireframe that people can access it. It qualifies as a peer-reviewed piece of research because it's gone through international research reviewers, it's gone through local reviewers, it's gone through 3 reviews, so it's considered a peer-reviewed piece of research. And it is, and the reason why we want peer-reviewed research and the reason why we want you to have it on the wireframe, your PhD specifically, is so that you can link to it. You know, we didn't speak about this in the session, but hyperlinking, so we always hyperlink to research. So when you present a fact, if I say 90% of the children in South Africa this year are not going to pass matric, or last year didn't pass matric, that, you know, they'd want to say, where's the fact that you're basing that on? Is there a study that's been done? Is there a fact sheet that's been released by government that shows that? What are you basing that on? So we will always ask you to link to your research, and specifically to the research that you're writing about. We want to be able to link to it so that people who want to question it can go and click on the link and question it through the right channels. I hope that answers your question, Mphoentle.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Alex, one last thing. I just want to encourage you to please sign up to the Conversation Africa's newsletter. We send a newsletter out every single morning at 6:30 a.m. South Africa time. If you sign up to our newsletter, you'll get it 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday. It's a nice way to see what's being published on the Conversation, to familiarize yourself with how things are framed, and just to get yourself comfortable with the notion of engaging with the Conversation, so that when you guys all publish your own research on the Conversation, you already have the habit of reading our site and our platforms.
Thank you for that.
No, that's my advert.
Yeah, no, I think we can also share the link so that the participants will be able to then join the newsletter. But thank you for that reminder. Good marketing.
Thanks so much.
I suppose that comes to the end of the Q&A. So we'll move now to the end of the session, and that will be the vote of thanks by the SAERA chairperson, Professor Maureen Robbins.
Thanks so much, Prof Zayd.
Okay, so thanks everybody. I've been listening with great interest. I'm also a former writer and a subscriber. You'll be glad to know, Candice. Every day I get it in my news box, which is great. So my job is very simple. Mphoentle gave me a list of people to thank, but I think I'm just going to do it in one, and that is yourself, of course, Candice, and Zayd, and of course Mphoentle as well. I mean, the enthusiasm and the dynamism and the excitement that you, 3 of you, project is just fantastic. You know, SAERA, the South African Education Research Association, we are here to promote research. We're here to promote young researchers. And when I sit in a webinar like this, I think, you know, this is just perfect. This is really achieving our aim, enthusing people about research, sharing information. And I think what's important about SAERA is we try and do this in a non-competitive way, you know, really a peer support approach. And this is a good example of that. So I will just encourage everybody to listen out for more webinars. Mphoentle is very enthusiastic. She's our ECR rep, and she will inform you. And also our conference is happening from the 30th of October to the 3rd of November in East London. I think, Candice, you might well be interested to get some more information on that. We're busy organizing the website as we speak, so there's only basic information there, but I can tell you it's in East London from the 30th of October to the 3rd of November at the Blue Lagoon Hotel. But other than that, I think, yeah, just to thank everybody who's attended. We had 40-something people, which is wonderful, from different countries, and wish everybody a lovely weekend. So thanks, Mphoentle, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I don't have to do another thank you. I just wanted to ask if you are comfortable, if you can open your video, please, so that you can just take a picture and create memories. If you don't mind, please. Just a quick one, and I'll take a picture for everybody, and we are good. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming.
Now we'll see who's still in their pajamas, Mphoentle.
Don't expose us, please. All right, I think I've got enough people in the screen. I'm not sure if others are comfortable projecting themselves. So if you can just say cheese. I'll take one and I'll take another one. Just a second, please bear with me. Sorry, guys. Just one more, include others. Right, let me take another one. Yes, one more.
Cheese.
Yes, just say SAERA, ECR, something. Just a second.
SAERA.
Yes.
SAERA.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please have a wonderful long weekend and a long weekend. Prof Zayd, you are my hero. Dr. Candice, thank you so much. Prof Maureen, thank you. And everybody, thank you for your support and for joining us and really enjoying the ECR's menu. We've got a lot more webinars coming throughout this year. Please be on the lookout. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Everyone.